She cried at the human's door. Sky was dark and heavy clouds moved like shadows across the stars. The wind was cold and sharp, and the night was too. Quiet Captain Raynor sat alone in his small wooden house on the edge of the forest, the fire. Inside the room was low, and the light danced on the old walls. He held a metal cup in his hands and stared at the smoke rising from the tea. His face was strong and tired, and his eyes had seen too many wars. He was a hero once. Now he was just a man trying to live in peace. Then the alarm beeped, just one sharp sound motion sensor. Something or someone was outside. Raynor stood up fast and reached for his plasma rifle. He moved to the door quietly and looked at the screen on the wall. There was a figure, tall and thin, kneeling in the dirt, right at his doorstep. Not human. Her skin was pale blue, and her long hair was wet from the rain. She was shaking, her hands were up. No weapons, just fear. He opened the door a little and pointed the rifle through the gap. The cold wind pushed in. She looked up at him, her eyes glowing soft blue in the dark, and she said in a voice full of pain, "Please let me in. I am strong. I will give you strong children. I will work for you. Just do not send me back." Raynor did not speak. He only stared at her. His heart was calm, but his mind raced. She was Zellarian alien. The same race that once ruled over humans. The same race that put collars around their necks. The same race that killed his brother. She dropped her head to the ground and her tears mixed with the dirt. Her body shook with cold and weakness. "I escaped." She said, "They will kill me. They will take my child. Please, I do not want to fight. I do not want to hurt. I just want a life." Raynor looked left and right. No patrols. No drones. He stepped out and pulled her inside. The door closed behind them and locked with a click. She fell on the floor and coughed, her hands holding her stomach. He saw marks on her arms, burns, scars, symbols carved into her skin. He looked away. He had seen those before in the war on breeding slaves. "What is your name?" he asked Agila. She whispered, "Why did you come here? Why this place?" "Why me?" "Because you are human." She said, "Because you fought for your people, because you are strong, because you have a heart, and because I am carrying a human child." Raynor froze. His grip on the rifle tightened. A lie it must be, or a trap, or worse. She looked at him straight into his eyes. "I was taken from my planet. They forced us to breed with prisoners. But I fell in love with the stories of your kind, with your music, with your books, with your freedom. I want that life, even if it is short. Even if it means hiding forever, I want to live as something more than a tool." Raynor's jaw clenched. He turned away. He walked to the window and looked out into the dark trees. The stars above were silent and cold. The past came back in pieces. Chains, fire camps, screams, humans treated like animals. Now everything had changed. Now humans were the rulers. Now aliens feared them. He looked back at her. Zayla was lying on the floor, breathing slow, eyes closing. She looked so small, so broken. The screen on the wall flashed again. A warning: military alert, unknown Zellari lifeform detected in Sector 9. His sector. Raynor walked over and turned the screen off. He looked down at her. He saw not an enemy, but a woman who ran from monsters, just like humans once did. He picked her up and carried her to the small couch. She was light, too light. She had not eaten in days. He covered her with a blanket. She whispered again, "Thank you. Thank you for seeing me, not just my skin, not just my blood." Raynor sat beside her and held his rifle close. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the forest whispered. Inside, two old enemies sat in silence, one broken by the past, the other haunted by it, and in the dark, a new future began to breathe. The mark of the enemy morning came slow with a pale light that touched the hills and trees around Colony 12X. The forest was quiet, but not calm. Raynor stood at the edge of his small garden, holding a cup of hot tea, and watching the trees move gently in the wind. His mind was not at peace. Inside his house, an alien slept. Inside his house, a Zellari female rested on his couch, like a secret, like a memory, like a warning. He walked back in and saw her eyes open and glowing like soft fire under her heavy lids. She sat up slowly, her arms shaking, her breathing sharp and short. Raynor handed her food. She looked At it with surprise, like no one had ever offered her a meal before. She took it with care and ate with quiet hands. Rainer sat in the chair across from her and watched her. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of questions, full of doubt, full of something neither of them wanted to speak yet. "Why did they mark you?" he asked, and his voice was low and hard like stone. Rubbing against stone, she paused, then slowly pulled up the sleeve of her robe. There on her arm, burned into the flesh, was a black mark, not ink, not paint burnt, a circle with 3 lines crossing through it, the mark of the breeders. He had seen it before. In the war, in the prisons, on those Zalari women used to make children for war. Some of those children still lived. Most died in cages before they could walk. Zayla looked at the mark and then looked away like it was a piece of her she never asked for but could never remove. They made us live in the dark. They took our names, our futures, our bodies, they said. We were chosen to carry new life, but it was never life, it was only purpose. Weapons born in pain. Rainer said nothing. His hands gripped the arm of his chair so hard the wood creaked. He felt a heat rise in his chest, not anger, not fear, but something older and colder. He had fought monsters, and now one sat in front of him and called herself. Prezela touched her stomach lightly, as if to check if her body was still her own. "I ran," she whispered. "I broke free during a transport. There was fire and noise, and I ran through the smoke until the stars looked close again. I followed the map stolen from a guard. I came to you because they said your name." Rainer leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Who told you about Meshmet?" His gaze steady but soft. "A soldier, one of yours. He was captured 3 years ago. He told me stories of Earth, of freedom, of a man who never gave up. He said you were the last human he saw before the prison door closed forever." Rainer's breath caught for a moment, but he made no sound. He knew who it was. Sergeant Vale, lost during the siege of Corin 5, thought dead, but not forgotten. Za La looked at the window like something outside pulled her attention. "He is dead now," she said, "but his words live in me." Suddenly, a beep from the wall screen broke the still air. Rainer stood fast and tapped the panel. A new message blinked in red. "Warning, unconfirmed. Zalari signal active in nearby zone. Scanners online. Search patrols inbound." He turned to her, and his face was hard again. "They are coming," he said. "If they find you here, they will kill you, or worse, they will not listen to words or marks or tears." She stood slowly and looked around like she already knew this would happen. "I do not want you to die for me," she said. "I will leave if you ask, but if I go they will find me. They always do." Rainer thought of the child she carried, of the scars on her arms, of the fear in her voice, of the past still bleeding into the present. He went to the closet and pulled out a black cloak and tossed it to her. "Put this on. We go underground." Zayla caught the cloak and wrapped herself in it. The cloth was heavy but warm, like safety, like hope. For the first time in her life, maybe she felt something close to trust. They moved quickly out the back door into the trees. Rainer led her through the old hunter paths. No lights, no noise, only the sound of boots in mud and branches brushing cloth under an old barn, half ruined by time. He opened a hidden door. Inside the earth was a tunnel, cold and dark and safe. He looked at her and she looked back. Neither spoke, but both knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Above them, the sky was full of search drones and soldiers. Below them, silence waited like a deep breath in the dark. A marked enemy and a human warrior vanished from the world, and something new began to grow between fear and fire. The choice of mercy. The tunnel smelled of old stone and wet air, like the earth had been holding its breath for too long. Rainer walked ahead with a slow and steady pace, his rifle in hand, his steps light but certain. Behind him, Zayla followed, her breath uneven, her eyes shifting in the dark, like she expected something to rise from the walls and take her back. The light on Rainer's shoulder showed the path, and the narrow beam shadows moved like ghosts on either side. They walked for what felt like hours, though the tunnel was not so long. Each sound echoed the scrape of boots, the soft whisper of breath, the silent weight of fear. Finally they reached an old bunker left from the early days of the colony. Rainer opened the heavy door and led her inside. Bunker was cold and quiet with metal walls and a small generator humming in the corner. He turned it on and soft yellow lights blinked to life, revealing crates, old tools, and a cot against the wall. "You stay here," he said. "No one comes down without my signals, eh?" La looked around like a bird trapped in a cage, but still grateful for the space. She sat slowly on the cot and placed her hands over her stomach again, her fingers trembling. "You saved me," she said, "even when the world says I do not deserve saving." Rainer did not answer. He checked the security feed and sent a coded message to a trusted friend in the village. His face was tight with thought, his mind running with old memories and new questions when he stepped out of the bunker and locked it. Behind him, the forest felt colder than before. He walked through the trees back toward the village, his eyes scanning every shadow, every branch, every silent shape between the leaves in the village. People whispered soldiers had come in the night. They asked about strange lights, about unknown signals, about alien trespassers. Rainer walked into the market like nothing had changed, his coat pulled tight, his face unreadable. He met with Juno, a former scout, now a farmer. They sat by the grain barrel speaking in quiet voices as wind moved the dust around them. "She is Zalari," Rainer said. "She carries a child. She ran from them and now she hides in the earth like we once did." Juno looked at him, her eyes sharp with memory. "You remember what they did," she said. "How they burned our homes, how they bred children in cages. Now you shelter one of them." Rainer's jaw clenched. "I also remember how it felt to beg for mercy and receive none." Juno leaned closer, her voice like a knife. "If they find her with you, you will not face mercy either. They will take your land, your rights, your life." Rainer stood and walked away without another word, his heart heavy, his steps harder with each breath. That night back in the bunker, Zayla sat alone listening to the quiet. She could feel the weight of the soil above her, the silence pressing in like a slow breath that never ends. She looked at the mark on her arm and then at her stomach, and then at the door. Rainer returned with supplies, food, water, a blanket. He placed them without speaking and sat across from her watching. She broke the silence with a whisper. "They will never stop hunting me." "Then let them," he said. "Let them see that mercy still lives in human blood, even after all they took." She looked at him, and for the first time her eyes did not show fear, but something like wonder. "Why?" she asked. "Why show me kindness?" "Because," he said, "if we become what they were, we lose what made us human." Suddenly a sound rang through the bunker. A beep, sharp and fast. Motion sensors triggered. Someone was close. Rainer grabbed his rifle and turned off the lights. He pressed a finger to his lips and moved to the entrance silently. Footsteps above, voices low, unfamiliar. Not patrol, not scouts. Local men from the village. He listened. They spoke of rewards, of bounties, of traders who hide aliens for credits. Rainer stayed silent, his body still, his breath slow. After some time the voices faded, the footsteps moved away. He came back to Zi. La, his face darker than before, his mind turning with danger. "They will come again," he said, "next time with soldiers. Then the first should leave," she said, "before you lose everything." Rainer shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "you stay. We fight this not with guns, not with fear, but with truth." She touched his hand gently, her voice soft but sure. "Then I will trust you until the end." In the dark of the earth, a warrior and an enemy became something more than strangers, not yet allies, not yet family, but something new, born from the ashes of old hate. And above them, the world waited, hungry for blood, or maybe ready for changed secrets of the hybrid program. The night was long and heavy with silence, like the stars were holding their breath. Zayla sat alone in the bunker, wrapped in the black cloak. Rainer gave her her hands resting on her stomach, her eyes staring at the metal wall that trapped her but also kept her safe. Her thoughts ran like rivers, fast and wild, sometimes calm, sometimes crashing. The child inside her moved once, and she closed her eyes for a moment, feeling both joy and fear in the same heartbeat. Rainer returned after 3 days, his face rough with dust, his coat torn at the shoulder, his steps heavy with quiet rage. He said nothing when he entered, only placed the supplies down and sat on the floor across from her. Zayla watched him, knowing something had changed in him something deep and sharp. What did you find? She asked softly. Looked at her not with anger, not with hate, but with something deeper, something colder than fire. He reached into his pack and pulled out a data chip. I broke into the old command center. He said I found what they did not want anyone to see. Plugged the chip into the wall console, and a small screen flickered to life. Images appeared, rows of cages filled with Zalari. Women young and old, weak and strong, their eyes hollow, their bodies marked. Then more cages filled with human prisoners used for breeding programs, forced into pairing with the Zalari. Females to create new soldiers. Children raised in silence, trained to kill before they could read, told they were the future of galactic control. Half human, half Zalari. Perfect minds, perfect strength. No loyalty, no choice. Leia looked away, her hand over her mouth, her body shaking. Raynor watched her. Not all the footage was old. Some of it was recent, too recent. You know what this means? He asked. These programs never stopped, even after the war. Even after our victory, some humans continued the experiments in secret, using your kind like animals. And no one speaks of it. Zyla nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. I was one of them, she said, not born for war, but stolen for it. My mother tried to hide me, but they found us. They marked me, they taught me what I was meant to be, but I refused every lesson, every order, every rule I broke until they locked me in the darkness and called me broken. Raynor leaned back against the wall, his eyes closed, his mind full of fire. We became what we hated, he said, and they call it progress. Leia looked at the screen again, where a child stood in armor, eyes blank, hands bloody. That is not strength, she whispered, that is sorrow carved into bones. Raynor stood and turned off the console, the screen going black, like the truth had spoken enough. He walked to the bunker door and stopped, his hand on the metal. You have a choice, he said. We run forever, or we show the world what they have hidden. She stood to her back straight, her voice firm. I want the truth to live, even if I do not. That night they sent the footage to trusted contacts off-world, using old smuggler lines buried deep in the colony's systems. They knew the message might be blocked. They knew someone would come, but silence was no longer safety. In the morning, drones passed overhead, scanning the forest with cold eyes. Raynor and Zila stayed hidden, listening to the hum of engines like flies circling something dead. Inside the bunker, they waited, watched, and planned. Do you hate them? She asked once. The children made from pain. Raynor shook his head slowly. No, he said, they did not choose the fire, they were born, and I hate the ones who lit it. Zila nodded and held her stomach again. Then maybe this child can be something new. Not born from hate, not trained for war, just born to live. Raynor looked at her, then looked at the locked door, at the old walls, at the place where fear had lived too long. He knew what would come, not just soldiers, but questions, doubt, anger, maybe hope. Outside, the sky was changing, clouds gathering, wind rising, like the world itself was waking from a long sleep. Inside the earth, two lives burned with truth. A warrior who had lost everything, and a woman who still carried the future in her hands. And far across the stars, screens blinked to life, warning sounded, and secrets long buried began to breathe. Hunted by both worlds, the stars above were quiet, but below the silence was broken. In the distance, lights moved like fireflies, but their wings carried no peace. 3 ships entered the atmosphere. Dark, sleek, built for speed and capture. They did not fly like patrols, they hunted like wolves. They came not from the human government, and not from the Zalari remnants, but from something in between, something worse. Raynor stood outside the old barn, his hand resting on the hidden bunker's latch, his eyes fixed on the sky as the ships passed overhead. He had seen those ships before, not during war, but after, when things were supposed to be better. No flags, no emblems, no voices on open channels, just force, just silence, just the cold rules of those who profit from shadows. Inside, Zyla sat near the small heater, her hands gripping a cloth as she wiped her arm again and again, like the mark might vanish if she scrubbed long enough. She heard his footsteps above and felt the old fear rise again, the one that never fully left. He came down and shut the door behind him slower than usual. She looked at him, and saw the storm in his eyes. "They are not military," he said. "They are private hunters, bounty or blood." Maybe both. She closed her eyes and whispered something in her native tongue. Raynor placed a bag beside her pack light. "We move before sunrise. No signals, no trails, we vanish." She nodded and began to fold the blanket with care, like it still held warmth from another world. Then a sound came, sharp and fast. A voice through static, a coded message from the smuggler net. Raynor opened it and read the words slowly. "They have seen the footage. It has reached Earth's outer colonies. Some believe, some deny, some are afraid. But the truth has roots now." Zayla smiled for a moment. Then the moment passed. Hope never came alone. It always walked with danger. That night they did not sleep. They sat side by side, weapons ready, bags packed, the silence between them, not empty but strong like a wall. They both leaned against. Raynor told her about his mother, how she sang even when the camp guards beat her, how she whispered songs about oceans even when the sky was ash. Zayla told him about the stars above her world, how they pulsed like heartbeats, how her father used to say the stars remember every cry, every hope, every name. At first light they moved through the trees, over frozen streams, across dead fields where old machines slept under vines. They did not speak, but their steps matched like music in slow rhythm. Then they heard the drone, a soft hum at first, then sharper, louder, closer. Raynor pulled Zayla into a ditch under thick roots. He covered her with his coat and raised his rifle. The drone passed once, then again, then it stopped. A beam of red light scanned the ground. It caught movement. A voice spoke from above, "Surrender the fugitive. You have 30 seconds. Raynor stepped into the light, his hands raised slowly, his voice calm. "She is not a weapon. She is not a threat. She carries life, not war." The drone scanned him, then fell silent. Then it fired. A sharp blast missed his head by inches. He dropped and rolled, firing back. The drone spun out of control, crashed into a tree, and exploded in white fire. Zayla crawled out, her breath shaking, her eyes wide with shock. "You said no signals," she whispered. "They found us anyway." Raynor looked at the wreck, his jaw tight, because someone told them where to look. They moved again, faster, now deeper into the wild where no roads reached. But it did not matter. By sunset, they were surrounded. 5 figures stepped out of the trees, their armor dark, their faces hidden. One stepped forward, his voice smooth and cold. "Raynor Kane, you are charged with harboring a known genetic asset of war under Section 12 of Planetary Code. Your protection of her is a crime." Zayla stood beside him, her hand on her stomach, her voice steady. "I am not a code. I am not a tool. I am not your project." The man tilted his head slightly. "You are property. Your child is a prototype." That is all. Raynor stepped between them. "Not anymore." Then the shooting began. Trees burned, soil split, voices shouted, pain echoed across the wild hills. Raynor fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Zayla ran through smoke and fire, dodging blasts, crawling under fallen trees, her breath sharp, her heart louder than the war. She found a cave and hid there, her hand over her mouth, her other hand over her child. She waited for silence. It never came. When she stepped out at dusk, the trees were quiet again. Raynor was gone, and the clearing smoke rose, and bodies lay still. No sign of him, no voice, no trail. Zayla fell to her knees and cried. Without sound, hunted by both worlds, hated by both sides. She was now alone, but not broken. Inside her something still lived. Then that was enough. The escape and the child. The cave was cold and wet, with walls that breathed like old stone lungs. Zayla sat in the corner, wrapped in torn cloth, her face marked with dust, her hand still shaking from what she saw, what she lost, what she carried. The wind outside howled like voices calling names of the dead. She did not answer. She only listened. Every moment her heart asked the same question. Where is Raynor? Is he gone? Is he ash? Or is he still fighting out there in the trees, in the shadows, in the silence? The fire she built was small but enough. She boiled roots, drank warm water, and whispered to the child inside her, "You will not be born in chains. You will not know the sound of commands. You will hear rivers and trees, not guns and screams." For 3 days she waited. She did not sleep much. She did not cry again. Her tears had turned into Something sharper, then came the voice cracked through static. A tiny signal hidden deep in the come line of the stolen device. Raynor gave her it, whispered her name, Zila. His voice not full, not strong, but alive. She ran from the cave before the sun rose, her feet bleeding, her cloak torn, her eyes wide with fire. She followed the sound across old battlefields, through broken towns and past bones that no longer had names. Then she found him, half buried under a metal wing of a downed drone, his arm broken, his face burned, but his eyes still lit with the same fire she saw when he first opened the door. "Came," he said, his voice dry like old stone. "I followed your light," she said, and helped pull him free, her hands not strong enough alone, but her will larger than mountains. They rested in a safe house built long ago by rebels, forgotten by governments, remembered only by maps that lived in Raynor's head there. She washed his wounds, fed him roots, wrapped his arm, and told him of the child's movements, of the dreams she had, while waiting, of the voices she heard in wind that sounded like hope. Raynor listened with closed eyes and a hand resting on the pulse of her wrist. "We need to leave this planet," he said. "We need to go where laws have not yet named us enemies." Zayla nodded. "There's one place," she said. "Far from the colonies, past the burned rings of the old war, past the Zilari. Grave worlds, a planet untouched and quiet, known only by smugglers and ghosts. They called it Haven, not because it was safe, but because no one looked there. With old codes and broken channels, Raynor called in one last favor, a pilot named Rusk, half machine, half truth, with no side but his own, and a price too high for most. Raynor offered the only thing left that mattered, the truth, the footage, the story. Rusk agreed. He did not speak much, only nodded through the screen and said one word. Midnight. They traveled by night through dust storms and radar fields. Zila flew the first half, her hands steady, her eyes always checking Raynor, who now leaned against the wall, pale but breathing. Once they were caught by a border drone, but Zila spoke in an old Zilari dialect and told a story of illness and trade and sorrow, and the drone let them pass, its scanner confused by her mix of blood and tone. At midnight the ship came black and fast, silent as death. Rusk stood at the ramp, metal arms, folded eyes, blinking slow like he had seen all wars and still found no reason to speak of them. "You brought baggage," he said, looking at her belly. "I brought the future," she replied without fear. He nodded once and turned away. Inside the ship the hum was soft, the lights dim, the air dry and clean. Raynor lay down in the back, Zila beside him, her hand in his breath slow but calm. "You said no more running," she whispered. "This is not running," he said. "This is surviving." The ship rose, and the stars opened wide above them, a sky with no names, only paths. As they left orbit, they looked down one last time below them. Fires burned, and towers fell, news spread across human and Zilari networks alike. Footage leaked, truth spilled, names were spoken that once lived in shadows. "They will come after us," Zayla said. "They will call this child a threat." Raynor looked at her, then at the soft glow of her skin, then at the small bump that now held more power than any weapon. "Then let them come," he said. "We will not raise a soldier, we will raise a soul." And in the quiet of the stars, as the engines hummed and the past fell away, something new began to grow. Not fear, not war, but a chance. The child inside her kicked once, and both of them smiled. The last door, the sky above Haven was soft and silver, a color between morning and memory. Mountains rose in the distance, covered in green mist, like the planet itself was still dreaming. No satellites, no soldiers, no signs of war, only the sound of wind and wild rivers and strange birds that sang. Without fear, Zayla stood outside the small home they built from old stone and fresh wood, her hand resting on her stomach, round and full of life, her eyes watching the valley below. Raynor sat nearby, carving shapes into smooth rock, teaching himself stillness after a life made of fire. It had been many months since they left the colonies. No one came, no signals reached them, only silence, but it was not empty. It was peace. The child came on the first rain. Zi La screamed through the storm, her voice rising like thunder, her body shaking with pain and strength. And something ancient that lived in all mothers Raynor held her hand, wiped sweat from her skin, whispered old words from old songs, and did not look away. Even once the birth was not easy. Her blood mixed with the earth. Her cries echoed through the forest, but when it was over, there was breath. There was light, a child with skin like dusk and eyes like silver. A heartbeat strong and steady. A cry not of fear, but of claim. They named her Kale, a word from both tongues meaning born between worlds. Zayla slept for 2 days after Raynor watched over both mother and child, his eyes never closing more than a moment, his rifle near his feet. But untouched the days passed slow like pages turning in a book written by no one. Kale grew fast. She laughed before most, walked before most. Her mind sharp, her questions endless. Why is the sky big? Where do the stars sleep? What is war? Why do people run? Zayla told her stories not of fire and blood, but of wind and light, of trees that remember names, of rivers that carry dreams. Raynor told her stories of what it means to choose, to protect, to forgive, to change. One morning, Kale found an old transmitter hidden under the floor. She brought it to them in both hands, eyes wide with wonder. What is this? She asked. Raynor looked at it, then at Zayla. They knew the time had come. They powered it on, static at first, then voices, old and new messages flying across the void. Some cried for help, some demanded control, some told lies. But one voice stood out, a young woman speaking of change. Her name was unknown, but her words clear. We found the files, the truth spread. Some of us listened, some of us rose. We do not want the past to return. We want to build again. If you hear this, know you are not alone. Zayla touched the screen, her eyes full of quiet light. Maybe the world is ready, she said. Raynor nodded slowly. Maybe it is time to return. Kale stood between them, her face serious like the wind had whispered something to her. Are we going back? She asked. Raynor knelt down, his hands on her shoulders. Not back, he said. Forward. They spent one more season on Haven, planting food, storing data, recording their story. Raynor uploaded everything to a secure beacon. Zayla wrote the truth in both languages. Kale left her own mark, a drawing of 3 hands joined in one circle. When the stars aligned, they left a new ship, this time built by Rusk. Quiet and fast, with no weapons, just shields and silence. As they rose from Haven soil, the planet gave no sign of loss, only the wind danced and the rivers flowed. The ship crossed old war zones, past grave moons, reached colonies where change had already begun. They landed at a neutral station where flags of many worlds waved together, not in unity, but in truce. They walked through metal halls and silent stairs. Zayla held Kale in her arms. Raynor walked beside them, wearing no armor, no weapons, only truth. At the council gate stood 2 guards, one human, one Zilari. They looked at each other, then stepped aside. The door opened wide. Bright inside stood leaders, old and new. Some looked at them with fear, others with hope. Raynor spoke first. I fought for freedom, then I ran from it. Now I return to offer it. Zayla spoke next. I was born to serve, then I chose to live. Now I choose to speak. Kale stood between them, holding the beacon. This is the story, she said. Ours, yours, every onus. The room fell silent, and then the world began to change, not with war, not with fire, but with choice, and behind that last door a future waited, one not built by blood, but by those brave enough to believe.